Hello guys, recently I posted 3 videos about the factors that controls our exposure for video, and these 3 factors, it is the shutter speed, the aperture, and also the ISO. So these 3 factors, it is the factors that we use to set the exposure for our camera to shoot videos. And in today's video guys, I want to do some kind of recap, refresh, and to discuss how to use these 3 factors together to achieve the best exposure possible for video. The first thing I change before shooting any video is the shutter speed. And guys, the shutter speed again is how much we keep our image sensor exposed to the light, and we measure this in seconds. So for example, now I want to use this camera to shoot video. The first thing I look to is the shutter speed. I change the shutter speed, then after that I start looking to the other factors. Now usually for shutter speed in video we use the 180-degree rule, and this rule, it is very simple and it is straightforward. It is your frames per second multiplied by 2, and the result of this equation should be your shutter speed. For example, this camera, it can shoot full HD videos up to 60 frames per second. So 60 multiplied by 2 equal 120. So I should use a shutter speed value in this camera 1/120th of a second in order to have a correct exposure for my video using this camera. So the correct value should follow the 180-degree rule. Unless you have to shoot a special scene like fighting scene, intense scene, or scene with motion blur, then you have to play with your shutter speed value. And beyond this, most of the time we follow the 180-degree rule. And remember, the shutter speed for video is totally different than the shutter speed for still and for photography. Now for the full details about the shutter speed and how to use it, you can watch this video and click on this link. The second thing I look to when I want to shoot video is the aperture. And the aperture, it is a hole or opening inside your lens. It controls how much light passes through the lens and hits your image sensor. And now for the aperture, we use the aperture to control how much light hits our image sensor, and also if we want to do separation between the objects in the foreground and the background, if we want to blur the background and keep the objects in focus. So now guys, for the aperture, we need to pay attention to the aperture value, and the aperture value we represent it in the camera using the f-stop. The smaller f-stop, it is the wide open aperture, and the larger f-stop, it is the smaller aperture. So if you want to capture more lights, you need to have smaller f-stop like f1.8, f1.4, then you will be able to capture more lights. But if you use a smaller f-stop like f16 or f22, then you will have a smaller aperture and you will not be able to capture the same amount of light. Usually we use these numbers 14, 16, 22 for landscape when we want to have the whole scene in focus. And we usually use the smaller f-stop values, which I mean by this the larger aperture like f1.4 or f1.8, to blur the background and to have the object in the foreground in focus. Now this lens, it is 50mm f1.8. Now if I want to capture more lights, if I want to have the background more blur, what I can do, I can get faster lens that can go for f-stop f1.4 or f1.2. So after you set your shutter speed, you need to set your aperture. And when you want to set the aperture, you need to decide what you want to do. You need to look to the scene, and if you are shooting, for example, landscape, then you have to have almost everything in focus. And to have everything in focus, you need to go for f-stop like f14, f16, f22. But if you want to do separation, if you want to do some kind of interview, you want to have someone in focus and the background blur, then you have to use f-stop like f2, f1.8, f1.4, something like this. And remember always, the aperture, it controls how much light passes through the lens and hits the image sensor. So if you are in a low light situation, you are shooting a scene with low light, you need to capture more light. So you need to have a smaller f-stop and to have the aperture wide open. For the full details about the aperture and how to use it for video, click on this link to watch my video about aperture for video. After I set the shutter speed and the aperture, the third factor I look to is the ISO. And the ISO is how much the image sensor is sensitive to the light. As much as we are increasing this value, we are making the camera sensor more and more sensitive to the light. And as much as we are decreasing it, we are making the camera sensor less sensitive to the light. So if you want to have a brighter scene, you need to increase the ISO. If you want to have a darker scene, you want to decrease the ISO. But always remember, you need to use the lowest ISO value, the lowest possible ISO value. Why? Because more ISO means more grain and more noise in your footage. For me, I always try to use the minimum ISO possible. So if I'm shooting outside, in a sunny day, I don't want to use and I don't need to use high ISO value. Why? Because there is enough light. But if I'm shooting indoor, in some situations I don't have enough light. So I try to introduce some light sources, but if I don't have enough light sources, I start increasing the ISO value, but I keep increasing it to the level that I feel it is not adding a lot of noise or grain to the footage. So as a rule, remember guys, to always use the lowest ISO possible. For the full details about ISO and how to use it for video, click on this link to watch my video about ISO for video. Now I have one tip for you guys. I saw a lot of comments in the internet about some people, they want to shoot videos outdoor in a sunny day and they want to use wide open aperture. Now the problem here, if you want to have wide open aperture, this means that you will capture a lot of light, and in a sunny day there is a lot of light, so your scene will be too much bright. So what you can do to be able to shoot wide open aperture and in a sunny day is to use what we call it ND filters. ND stands for neutral density, and we use these filters in front of our lenses to reduce the amount of light coming to the camera. The ND filters, sometimes it comes built in the camera and sometimes it is not. So for example, this is my Nikon D750. If I want to shoot with this camera in a sunny day, I don't have here ND filters. I need to buy variable ND filters for my lens and start using it in front of the lens to block the amount of light or to reduce the amount of light coming to my image sensor, so I can use wide open aperture in a sunny day outdoor. Guys, I created playlist in my channel and I named this playlist Exposure for Video. To this playlist I added the 3 videos I posted recently, which is the shutter speed for video, the aperture for video, and the ISO for video. And I will add today's video to this playlist, so you can have better understanding of the exposure for video, how to set it and how to use it. You can check this playlist and watch these 4 videos anytime you want to set the exposure for your camera before you start shooting any video. That's it for today, guys. Please don't forget to hit the like button for me if you like this video. Share it if you want to share, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more and more videos, and I will see you all in the next video.